You don't exist, not in the way you believe you do. The identity you carry, your name, your occupation, your status, your history, these are labels, forms, shadows, but they are not you. Every time you say, I am this or I am that, you put on another mask. But who are you underneath all of them? At birth, you had no identity. As a child, you lived freely curious, present, without labels. Then society handed you a mirror and said, this is who you are. You accepted it without question. But that mirror was not truth. It was a reflection, distorted by expectations, fear, and ego. Shaolin teaches us to observe the mind, not to become it. When you sit in silence, when you breathe with awareness, and when you watch your thoughts without judgment, something extraordinary happens. The self you think you are begins to dissolve. What remains is not nothingness. It is everything. You are not a role. You are not a story. You are the awareness behind it. To understand this is freedom. From the very beginning of our lives, we are shaped by the environment around us. Before we even understand the world, we are given a name. That name becomes the first attachment to identity, something we did not choose, but are taught to respond to. Soon after, labels begin to pile on. Our gender, our religion, our nationality, our ethnicity, and our family's social status. Before we can form thoughts of our own, the world has already written the first chapter of our identity. Then comes education. We are placed into systems that reward certain behaviors and discourage others. We are told what is good and what is bad, what success looks like and what failure means. Slowly, we begin to internalize these judgments. If we perform well, we're told we're intelligent. If we misbehave, we're labeled problematic. These external evaluations become part of our internal narrative. We begin to think, I am this kind of person, but are we truly? As we grow older, social comparisons deepen the illusion. Society tells us that we must have a certain appearance, earn a certain income, follow a particular path to be worthy. The image of who we should be becomes stronger than our own voice. Social media amplifies this identity crisis. Every post, every photo, every comment becomes a performance, a carefully constructed projection of an ideal self. We edit ourselves to fit into molds. We curate our image to be accepted, and in doing so, we drift further from who we truly are. This constructed identity becomes a prison. When someone criticizes us, we feel personally attacked, not because their words are true, but because they challenge the mask we're desperately trying to hold together. When life doesn't go according to our plans, we suffer not because of the events themselves, but because those events threaten the idea of who we think we are. In truth, this identity is fragile. It is based on memory, past experiences, and how we interpreted them. It is based on projection, fears of the future, and desires to become more. But it is not based on presence. It is not rooted in the now. And it is not permanent. If you were to strip away everything, your name, your job, your possessions, your relationships, who would remain? That question is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to reveal something deeper, the awareness behind the identity. The one who observes, the silent witness, the unchanging presence. This understanding is not about rejecting society or becoming detached from the world. It is about seeing through the illusion of the ego, created self, and remembering that you are more than what the world has told you. You are not your resume, you are not your scars, you are not your titles. All of those things can be taken away or changed, but the essence that observes all of it, that remains untouched. When you begin to question your identity, you open the door to inner freedom. You begin to realize that the version of you that you've been defending and polishing is not fixed, and it's not even real in the way you thought it was. You begin to understand that the self is fluid, ever-changing, and that underneath all of it is a spacious, silent awareness that does not need validation, approval, or status. This is the first step on the path of self-realization, to recognize that the identity you have clung to is constructed. It was built from the outside in, not from the inside out. It is not the destination, it is the distraction. Once you see this clearly, you no longer chase identity. You begin to seek truth. To understand yourself clearly, you must first understand the nature of the ego, not as something inherently evil, but as something limited, mechanical, and often unconscious. The ego is not your enemy, but it is not your essence either. It is a psychological structure, a mental formation created to help you operate in the world. It is your internal identity card, a collection of labels, memories, attachments, beliefs, opinions, and judgments you use to say, "This is me." In its most basic form, the ego serves a survival function. From a biological perspective, the ego helps you define boundaries, what is me and what is not me. It teaches you to protect yourself, to defend your territory, to avoid danger, and to build a sense of security. In the physical world, this separation has its place. Without some sense of identity, we wouldn't be able to function in society, care for our needs, or relate to others. However, the problem arises when this temporary, functional identity becomes the only reality we know. The ego, once a tool, becomes the master. It starts to dominate our thoughts, emotions, and behavior. It doesn't just tell us how to survive, it tells us how to feel superior, how to gain power, how to control, how to compare, and how to separate ourselves from others. It is constantly hungry for attention, validation, and recognition. The ego thrives on duality, me versus you, us versus them, success versus failure. It creates conflict where none is needed. When you succeed, it inflates itself. When you fail, it punishes you with guilt and shame. When someone praises you, the ego feels strong. When someone criticizes you, the ego feels threatened. It is unstable, reactive, and fragile, yet we mistakenly take it as the core of who we are. Another way to understand the ego is to see it as a mask, not a malicious mask, but a necessary one we've worn for so long that we've forgotten we're wearing it. This mask is built from the roles we play: the achiever, the victim, the rebel, the intellectual, the spiritual seeker. The ego takes pride in these identities and clings to them even when they cause suffering. Because without these roles, the ego fears it will dissolve, and it will. The ego is also rooted in time, in the past and the future. It feeds on memory. Look what I've been through. Look at what I've accomplished. Look at who hurt me. And it feeds on projection. I need to become this. I must get there. I will be happy when. But it cannot exist in the present moment. In the present, there is no comparison, no past to grieve, no future to chase, only being. And this is where ego begins to weaken: in stillness, in silence, in conscious observation. The moment you begin to witness your own thoughts without judgment, without identifying with them, something subtle shifts. You begin to realize, if I can observe my ego, then I am not my ego. That which observes cannot be the thing observed. You begin to watch your reactions, your pride, your defensiveness, your need to prove something, and in watching them, you create space. That space is your true power. It is the space of awareness. In that space, you're no longer controlled by your ego's patterns. You're no longer a puppet pulled by the strings of habit, fear, and insecurity. You begin to act with clarity rather than react from conditioning. This doesn't mean the ego disappears, it means it loses control. It becomes a quiet assistant instead of a loud dictator. You can still use it to function in the world, but you no longer mistake it for your true identity. You recognize that the ego is just one layer, not the core. The more you observe it, the more you understand its tricks. It wants to be right. It wants to win. It wants to possess. It wants to defend. It wants to be admired. It fears being ignored. It lives in the illusion of separateness. But beneath that, there is a deeper self, a self that does not need to be right, admired, or superior. A self that is already whole, already complete, and already free from the games the ego plays. In a world where everything is in a state of constant change, there exists one unchanging element within us: awareness. This awareness is often overlooked because it is not dramatic, not loud, and not easily defined, yet it is the silent witness behind every experience you've ever had. Everything else in your life, your body, your emotions, your thoughts, your circumstances is in flux. Your body ages, your moods shift, your beliefs evolve, your roles transform. You're not the same person you were 10 years ago, not physically, mentally, emotionally, or socially, but something has remained the same throughout all those years, the conscious presence that has observed it all. This presence is not tied to your thinking. It exists before thought and continues after thought dissolves. Consider this: when you were a child, you had thoughts and experiences, and today, as an adult, you also have thoughts and experiences. But the awareness that noticed them, that background sense of I am, has always been there. It is the continuous thread running through the fabric of your existence, even as the patterns on the fabric change endlessly. To recognize this truth requires a shift from identification with the contents of consciousness, thoughts, emotions, sensations, to recognition of consciousness itself. Most people are so absorbed in what they are thinking or feeling that they never question who is aware of those thoughts or feelings. But when you take a step back and simply observe your mind as if you are watching clouds pass through the sky, you begin to sense that you are not the clouds. You are the sky. In meditation, this understanding becomes more tangible. You sit in stillness and observe. A thought arises: I should do the laundry, and then it passes. An emotion surfaces: irritation, anxiety, joy, and then it too dissolves. Even your sense of self can shift. One moment you're confident, the next moment uncertain, and yet, through all of it, there is a quiet presence that remains unchanged. That presence is awareness. It does not judge. It does not compare, it simply witnesses, and in that witnessing there is peace. This is why awareness is so powerful. It does not try to fix anything, it simply reveals. The more you stay in awareness, the more you realize how much of your suffering comes not from life itself, but from your resistance to what life brings. Awareness allows you to see this clearly. It brings light to unconscious patterns, habits, and emotional reactions. It shows you that you are not your pain, not your past, not your future. You are the one who sees. In modern life, people are constantly seeking something to hold onto: a goal, a purpose, a label, a relationship, a possession, something they believe will give them a lasting sense of self. But everything external eventually fades or changes. What remains is this silent awareness, waiting patiently in the background, never forcing itself, but always available. In spiritual traditions like Zen, Taoism, or the teachings of Shaolin, this awareness is referred to in different terms: presence, the observer, the witness, the original mind, or the true nature. But the essence is the same: the unconditioned self, the aspect of you that exists before thought, before identity, before separation. Unlike the ego, awareness does not need to prove anything. It has no agenda. It does not crave success or avoid failure. It is not swayed by praise or blame. It is neutral, still, and expansive. When you begin to identify more with this presence than with the mental chatter in your head, your relationship with life transforms. Challenges no longer define you. Emotions no longer control you. You experience thoughts, but they do not consume you. And this awareness is not something distant or mystical. It is accessible in every moment: when you pause, when you breathe, when you simply notice. When you are eating and you become fully present with the taste. When you are walking and you feel your feet touch the ground. When you are listening, not just with your ears, but with your full attention. These are all doorways to awareness, not through effort, but through being. Awareness is not something to achieve, it is something to remember, it is not something to add. It is what remains when all distractions fall away. Suffering, in its deepest form, is not caused by what happens to us, but by how we relate to it. The true source of our pain is not the external world, but the internal illusion we mistake for reality. And that illusion is the false self, a self built on memory, fear, comparison, and craving. The more we identify with this constructed self, the more we suffer. What is the false self? It is the voice in your head that constantly narrates your life. It is the one that says, "I am not good enough," or "I must achieve this to be worthy." It is the self-image built from past experiences, especially the painful ones. It is the mask we wear to be accepted, to be liked, to be seen a certain way. This self thrives on stories about what should have happened, what might happen, or what others think of us. It clings to identities, beliefs, and roles that give it temporary comfort but no lasting peace. When something threatens this false self, when someone criticizes us, when we fail at something, when we feel excluded, the reaction is not just disappointment, it is suffering. Why? Because it feels like we ourselves are being diminished, not just an experience. The ego doesn't distinguish between a role being challenged and the core of our being. So we feel wounded, humiliated, broken even when, in reality, our deeper self remains untouched. This is how identification works. The more we attach ourselves to our thoughts, our emotions, our opinions, our titles, the more vulnerable we become. We begin to defend things that don't need defending. We personalize every experience. We take everything as a reflection of our worth. And in this endless pursuit to protect and uphold the false self, we suffer. We also suffer because the false self is always chasing something. It lives in lack, it's never enough, it wants more validation, more recognition, more control. Even when it achieves something, the satisfaction is short-lived. There's always the next goal, the next comparison, the next fear. This cycle is exhausting, and it blinds us from the truth that our wholeness does not depend on becoming something else. We are already complete, but the false self cannot see that. This suffering also extends into our relationships. When two people come together, not in awareness, but through their egos, they bring all their wounds, fears, and unmet needs into the interaction. Instead of connecting through presence, they connect through roles and expectations. One wants to be admired, the other wants to be needed. One fears abandonment, the other fears vulnerability, and so begins the dance of control, blame, disappointment, and pain, not because of love, but because of the masks they wear in the name of love. We carry this suffering quietly, often unconsciously. It shows up as anxiety, depression, restlessness, jealousy, anger. We blame the circumstances, not realizing the real cause is deeper, the belief that we are the voice in our head, that we are the one who is lacking, broken, or unworthy. But who is noticing this voice? Who is aware of the emotion? The moment we begin to step back and observe this identification, something changes. We notice that thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, but they are not me. They are events within consciousness, like waves on the ocean. The suffering begins to lessen, not because the waves stop, but because we stop mistaking the waves for the ocean. Even our most painful experiences, when seen from awareness, reveal their impermanence. We realize we are not the story we've been telling ourselves. We are not our trauma, our fears, or even our successes. All of those belong to the false self. They are experiences, yes, but not identity. The mind will resist this realization. It wants to stay in control. It will tell you that if you stop identifying with your ego, you'll become passive, indifferent, or weak. But the opposite is true. Only when you disidentify from the false self can you act with clarity, love, and freedom. You begin to respond to life rather than react. You meet challenges not with fear, but with presence. And slowly, as this recognition deepens, the suffering begins to dissolve, not because life becomes perfect, but because you no longer cling to the false self that demands perfection. The average human being has thousands of thoughts each day. These thoughts arise continuously, often without our conscious intent. They pass through the mind like clouds across the sky, one moment a worry about the future, the next a memory from the past, followed by a judgment, a craving, a fear, a desire. Most people live in complete identification with these thoughts. They believe whatever the mind says. They never stop to question, is this thought true? Is this thought helpful? Is this thought me? But here lies one of the most transformative truths you can ever realize. Just because a thought appears in your mind doesn't mean it is true. In fact, many of our thoughts are not only untrue, but deeply conditioned by fear, past trauma, cultural programming, and unconscious habits. Yet we carry them around as if they are facts, and those unquestioned thoughts become our prison. Freedom begins the moment you become aware of this conditioning, the moment you recognize that your mind is constantly interpreting, judging, labeling, and reacting, but that you are not those interpretations. You are the awareness behind the mind. You are the one who sees the thought, not the thought itself. For example, imagine the thought arises, I'm not good enough. In a state of unconsciousness, you don't question it. You simply believe it. It affects your posture, your choices, your relationships. It makes you shrink back from opportunity. It makes you seek approval. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But once awareness dawns, you pause. You notice the thought. You examine it. You ask, where did this thought come from? Is it universally true? Or is it just a belief I inherited and never examined? This gap between the thought and your belief in the thought is the doorway to freedom. Some thoughts are loud and aggressive, you'll never succeed. Others are subtle and seductive, just one more scroll. They must be thinking badly of you. You have to be perfect. These thoughts weave themselves into the fabric of our identity when we don't observe them clearly. But the moment you see a thought, as a mental event, not a truth, its power weakens. This is the essence of mindfulness, to watch the mind without clinging to it, without resisting it, without becoming entangled. It is like sitting by a river and watching leaves float by. You don't jump in after every leaf. You simply notice. Some leaves carry anxiety, others carry desire, some are shaped like old wounds, but you remain on the bank, present and unattached. This practice is simple but not easy. The ego resists it. It wants to argue, defend, prove, analyze. The moment you create distance between yourself and your thoughts, the ego feels it's losing control. But what's really happening is that you are regaining clarity. You're stepping out of the noise and into stillness. And in that stillness, you realize that peace was always there, hidden beneath the storm of compulsive thinking. The great spiritual masters like Master Shi Heng Yi, Eckhart Tolle, Ramana Maharshi, and others have all pointed toward this inner shift, not by suppressing thoughts or making them disappear, but by disidentifying from them. Thought becomes something you can use, not something that uses you. The mind becomes a tool in your hand, not a tyrant on your back. This freedom also brings great emotional intelligence. You begin to recognize that every emotion is preceded by a thought, and when you catch the thought early, you can choose how to respond. You no longer spiral into anxiety, depression, or rage without understanding why. You learn to meet emotions with compassion, not suppression. You become less reactive, more grounded, more conscious, and this awareness extends into every area of life. In conversations, you begin to listen instead of rehearsing your response in your head. In challenges, you act wisely instead of impulsively. In solitude, you find richness instead of boredom. Life becomes lighter because you are no longer carrying the heavy burden of every thought that passes through your mind. You realize you don't have to fix every thought, you don't have to believe every fear, you don't have to obey every impulse. You can let the thought come, let it pass, and remain rooted in awareness, untouched, undisturbed. In a world that is constantly demanding more action, more achievement, more movement, more attention, stillness is often misunderstood. It is mistaken for passivity, for weakness, for doing nothing. But true inner stillness is not the absence of action. It is the presence of unshakable clarity and conscious strength. It is the ability to remain centered while everything around you, and even within you, is in motion. Inner stillness is not something you chase. It is already within you, always present, like the silent depths beneath a stormy ocean. But because the surface is often so turbulent, filled with thoughts, worries, noise, ambition, regret, we lose touch with that calm depth. We live in reaction to the waves, forgetting the stillness underneath. Master Shi Heng Yi, like many masters who came before him, teaches that the most powerful state a human can cultivate is non-reactive awareness. This is not indifference, it is not suppression. It is the art of being fully present, grounded in yourself, and observing life as it unfolds without immediately being pulled, pushed, or thrown off balance. When you cultivate inner stillness, you are no longer a slave to your surroundings. You are no longer at the mercy of external validation or circumstances. You may face stress, but it does not consume you. You may feel fear, but it does not paralyze you. You may encounter conflict, but it does not disturb your core. This kind of stillness is not fragile, it is fierce, it is disciplined. It is the stillness of a warrior who knows their power does not lie in force, but in presence. Inner stillness is also the ground of true clarity. In stillness, the fog of confusion begins to lift. You begin to see your situation, your thoughts, and your emotions with more precision. You are not entangled in them, you are aware of them. This awareness allows you to respond rather than react, to choose wisely rather than impulsively. Just like muddy water becomes clear when left undisturbed, the mind too becomes clear when you stop agitating it with constant distraction and noise. Modern life does not encourage this stillness. We are bombarded with information, urgency, and stimulation. We are constantly distracted from ourselves, from the present moment, from the depth of our being. We scroll, we check, we compare, we consume, but underneath all this activity, there is a quiet voice that says, "Be still." It is in that stillness where the most profound answers arise, not from overthinking, but from presence. Not from force, but from alignment. The Shaolin way is not to fight life, but to flow with it from a place of internal stability, to train the body, but also the mind, to master the form, but also the formless. Stillness becomes the core from which all powerful action springs, measured, intentional, and pure. When you are still inside, you stop leaking energy. You are not pulled in every direction. You become rooted like a mountain, even when the winds of life blow strong. You listen more, you react less. You become aware of your breath, your heartbeat, your sensations, and this anchors you in the now. You learn to pause before you speak, to reflect before you act. You do not rush, because there is nothing to chase. You are already here. Stillness also allows deep transformation. In silence, you begin to confront parts of yourself that have long been buried. Old fears, insecurities, pain all arise when the noise fades. This is not easy, but it is necessary. Inner stillness is not always comfortable, but it is always truthful. It shows you what is real beneath the mask, beneath the performance, and in that rawness you find authenticity. You find yourself not the self constructed by society or ego, but the self rooted in awareness. There is immense discipline required to cultivate this stillness. It means creating space in your life for silence. It means practicing presence in meditation, in movement, in daily tasks. It means training the mind to be alert, yet undisturbed. This is why traditions like Shaolin or Zen emphasize repetitive, mindful practice. The aim is not to do more, but to be more deeply in what you are doing, to find the stillness within the action, to discover the sacred within the ordinary. Stillness is also where resilience is born. A person who is still inside can face difficulty with grace. They do not shatter when life becomes hard. They bend, but do not break. They adapt, but remain rooted. Because their strength is not dependent on outer success or comfort, it comes from within. It is forged in silence, in solitude, in presence. In a world obsessed with external achievement titles, possessions, validation, competition, it's easy to believe that mastery is something to be displayed, that it is proven by how much we've accumulated, how fast we rise, or how visibly skilled we are. But Master Shi Heng Yi, and the tradition he represents, reminds us that true mastery is not about domination or display, it is about internal transformation. The journey to mastery doesn't begin outside, it begins within. This inward path is subtle, profound, and often invisible to others. It requires no applause. It isn't fueled by ego. Rather, it's guided by intention, discipline, humility, and deep self-inquiry. The outer world may celebrate outcomes, but the inward journey is about the process, the refinement of the self, the quieting of the mind, the awakening of awareness. On the inward path, you begin to examine not what you're doing, but why you're doing it. What motivates your actions? Is it fear, pride, need for approval, or is it grounded in stillness, purpose, and clarity? These questions are not for the faint of heart. They require honesty. They require the courage to see through illusion, especially the illusion of self-importance. The inner path is not about becoming more, but about shedding false identities, reactive behaviors, conditioned beliefs, and limiting thoughts. It is a journey of deconstruction. Every time you sit in meditation, reflect in silence, or practice with full presence, you are peeling away layers of unconsciousness. This is mastery, the art of removing what is not you until only the essential remains. One of the most powerful aspects of the inward path is that it does not depend on circumstances. You don't need perfect conditions to walk it. Whether you are in a temple or a noisy city, whether life is going smoothly or falling apart, the inward path is always available. It is not about where you are, but how you are. Are you aware? Are you grounded? Are you aligned with your higher values even when no one is watching? This is why many people who appear powerful on the outside feel empty inside. They have mastered skills, but not themselves. They have conquered challenges, but not their inner chaos. They are driven, but not peaceful. They are impressive, but not present. Outward success without inward mastery often leads to a deeper sense of disconnection from self, from others, from life. Mastery of the inner world means knowing how to sit with discomfort, how to remain centered in the face of uncertainty, how to listen without reacting, how to observe your thoughts without becoming enslaved by them, how to act with intention rather than compulsion. It means letting go of the need to prove anything, and instead focusing on becoming everything that you already are: clear, aware, disciplined, compassionate. And while the world rarely sees this kind of mastery, it feels it. You walk into a room and people sense your calm. They feel your groundedness, your quiet power, your integrity. You don't have to speak loudly because your presence speaks. You don't have to convince others of your worth because you no longer doubt it yourself. You no longer react from ego, but respond from awareness. You no longer need the world to validate your path because you are walking it with inner conviction. This inward mastery is not a destination. It's a practice, a lifelong commitment. It is built day by day, moment by moment, breath by breath. It happens in the small decisions: to pause before reacting, to choose presence over distraction, to act with kindness instead of defensiveness. to return to your breath instead of your anger. These micro movements of awareness done consistently become your foundation. They become who you are. It is not glamorous. Often it's quiet. Often no one notices, but you notice, you feel the difference. You begin to live not for the image of success, but for the truth of wholeness. You begin to honor the sacred within the ordinary. You become a master not of the world, but of yourself, and in that mastery there is freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom from reaction. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from unconsciousness. The outward path may offer control, but the inward path offers peace, a peace that cannot be shaken by praise or blame, success or failure, gain or loss. So now the question is not who are you, but what are you when you let go of who you think you are. Strip away the labels, the noise, the thoughts, the false identities. What remains is not emptiness, but awareness, not nothingness, but presence. That still, silent witness within you is not bound by fear, not defined by your past, not limited by your mind. It simply is, and from that space true life begins. You don't exist as a fixed identity. You are not your story, your role, or your reputation. You are the awareness behind it, all the space in which life unfolds. And in realizing this, you don't become less, you become free. The journey of mastery, as taught by Master Shi Heng Yi, is not about becoming someone else. It's about unbecoming all that you are not. Returning to that quiet, still center, the place where thoughts come and go, yet you remain calm, clear, aware. So take a breath, come home to the present moment, step off the stage of illusion, be still. And remember, the truth of who you are cannot be spoken, it can only be known in silence.